الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I begin in the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful. All praise be to God, Lord of the universe, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon the noblest of prophets and upon his family, the pure, the good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That is to say that Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change that which is within themselves. And this is really the topic that I have focused on today, which is essentially that change inward and outward. I've been asked to introduce myself, and I normally don't like to do that because I'm not really anybody, and perhaps I should introduce myself by saying who I'm not. I'm not a scholar. I'm not an orator. I'm just a peer. I'm one of you. So I'm here to present as one of you, and inshallah to exchange thoughts, and the key operative word here is to exchange, because I believe that after this there'll be a period of discussion, and as opposed to kind of a one-way discourse, we hope inshallah that it can be an interactive session. So I guess with that said, just treat me as a brother, like one of you, presenting amongst you. And just maybe a little bit of my background. I'm from Toronto. I'm an alumni of the University of Toronto, where I've completed my master's in information management. I currently work as a project manager, and like you, I'm active in the community scene, primarily through the Thaqalain Foundation, the Thaqalain Muslim Association, which is a student-based network. So, I guess turning to the topic at hand, we are in the season of mourning, mourning of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, and his family and his companions. And we've passed the days of Ashura, and we're approaching the days of Arba'een, and these are the days of tribulations and trials of the family of the Messenger of God. And when we look at this tragedy, we see an obvious conflict that exists on the physical plane of reality. The conflict between the oppressed and the oppressor, between truth and falsehood, between the party of virtue and the party of vice. So there's obviously a conflict that's taking place in the deserts of Karbala on the day of Ashura. But Karbala and Ashura don't only exist on the physical plane, they also exist on a meta-physical plane, whereby Karbala symbolizes any place where that conflict takes place, whether it's physically or within ourselves. And Ashura represents any time in which that conflicts take place. So it's in a sense, it's meta-historical. It's beyond history. And again, our topic inshallah today is to have a look at what that conflict is. I mean, this is one of the key key operative words that take place here, which is the struggle. So what is jihad? Obviously this is a term that has been misunderstood, misperceived, and sometimes it's consciously, inadvertently. There's a lot of confusion about this term. So let's begin by defining these terms. So jihad derives from, the root word of jahada, and its literal meaning is to exert, to struggle, to make effort. When we put this into the Islamic context, it adds another dimension. Often when we find in the Quran the word jihad, it's followed by fi sabilillah, in the way of God. And we find that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, look at his last few words. He says, Bismillah, wa billah, wa ala millati rasulillah. By the name of God, and by God, or for God, and for the sake of the message of the Messenger of God. So, his struggle is one that has been purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, jihad, the struggle has various forms. The outer as well as the inner. So the outer is, one that is, perhaps, one that most people are familiar with, which is, something that's done in defense of faith, of the oppressed, of freedom. But there's also another dimension of that struggle, which is inward, and inshallah we'll elaborate on that a little bit further, which is, the struggle for piety and virtue and against our passions. So now let's again dwell a little bit more on the connection and the relation between Islam and jihad, and let's again take it back to the root. So Islam, as we know, is translated as submission. It's a way of life, a complete way of life, both on the individual level as well as the social level, in terms of submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's both an ideal as well as a process. Now, taking that into mind, that Islam is a complete way of life, and Islam means submission, then that submission, and this is what God requires. There seems to be maybe a contradiction between submission on the one hand and to struggle on the other, but these two are actually fit perfectly together when to submit requires to struggle, and this requires the struggle for us to be active in achieving the positive qualities in ourselves and removing the negative tendencies, and in ourselves as well as in society. So if we look at it from that dimension, then jihad has a very wide application. That just as how Islam is a complete way of life, and if it requires struggle, then that struggle also applies in all aspects of life. So let's again look at what Imam Hussein alayhi salam has said in reference to this struggle. Imam Hussein alayhi salam had said, "Inna al-hayata aqidatan wa jihada." Life is nothing more than conviction, aqidah, certainty, and jihad, struggle in the way of God, struggle towards that certainty. That's life in a nutshell, according to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And what we find in the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu idha darabtum fi sabilillahi fatabayyanu. So this translates, O you who have faith, when you issue forth in the way of Allah, try to ascertain. So before you strive, before you struggle, aqidah precedes jihad. Aqidah is to ascertain the truth. How can you struggle for something if you haven't ascertained whether it merits the struggle? Or how can you struggle against something when you haven't ascertained that there's demerits to it that you're struggling against? Also, how do you know that there's a need to struggle? How do you know that the struggle is justified? How do you know what are your own motives towards that struggle? So, before struggle, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you need to ascertain. So, again, let's again look at jihad vis-a-vis Islam. Now, Islam is a way of life that aims to establish equilibrium, both within and without. And when we find lack of equilibrium, you find injustice, you find oppression, you find conflict, you find chaos. And on the other hand, when there is equilibrium, you find peace, you find order, you find justice. Imam Ali alayhi salam had defined justice as putting a thing in its rightful place. And so when we have things in its rightful place in ourselves and in society, then that leads to peace, that leads to order, that leads to tranquility. That is justice. So, our duty as Muslims is to aim to establish that equilibrium, and that involves the struggle, jihad. So, this is part of the human condition. The human beings are conflicted. We have an animalistic side, and we have an angelic side. We have the what's called the nafs al-ammara. It's the self that incites us towards evil. Alaykum as-salam. And we also have the nafs al-mutma'inna, which is the self that seeks peace, that seeks tranquility. And it's kind of turbulent waters, that the human condition is kind of given to forgetfulness, not remembrance, to ghafla. And this is the struggle that we have to go against. The human condition isn't one that is always in the state of remembrance, and that's what we try to achieve. And so we're always in the danger of disequilibrium. And disequilibrium, if it persists, leads to disintegration, both inside and outside. Disintegration in ourselves, as well as disintegration in our society. And so, it's for us to constantly exert ourselves to maintain that equilibrium, both inward and outward. And the analogy that I've kind of put here in a sense of a picture is a ship in stormy waters. That it's very difficult to maintain that even keel. So a sailor in the murky water where there's turbulence and a storm has to always exert himself to maintaining that ship on an even keel and keeping it also towards that to the destination, to the goal. So that is basically kind of the framework of our discussion, the pure, the good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That is to say that change inward and outward. I've been asked to introduce myself, and I normally don't like to do that because I'm not really anybody, and perhaps I should introduce myself. I begin in the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful. All praise be to God, Lord of the universe, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon the noblest of prophets and upon his family. Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change that which is within themselves. And this is really the topic that I have focused on today, which is essentially Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen, wa ala ali baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.